The town of Dry Creek baked beneath the midday sun, its main street shimmering with heat and tension as though the earth itself held its breath. A wooden gallows stood like a crooked finger in the square, freshly hammered together that very morning, its noose swaying in the dry wind that carried the smell of dust, sweat, and fear. Crowds gathered, men with grim jaws and women clutching kerchiefs, muttering curses about the Apache woman who stood at the center of it all. She was slender, her long black hair hanging like a curtain down her back, her eyes steady though her wrists were bound. They said her name was Ayanna. Though no one bothered to use it here, she was nothing more than the Indian, blamed for stolen cattle, burned barns, and even the death of a rancher's son, though no proof tied her to any crime. Her only crime, whispered some, was being Apache in a town that had already decided her fate. The sheriff, a tall man in black, stood near her with a face carved from stone, torn between his oath to keep order and the small, nagging truth scratching at his conscience that the woman before him was more scapegoat than outlaw. The mob's voices rose, calling for the lever to be pulled, for the dust to claim her feet, for their hatred to be sated. Children perched on barrels to watch, and even the preacher stood silent, unwilling to fight the tide of anger sweeping the crowd. Ayanna lifted her chin, refusing to bow to their judgment, her dark eyes meeting the horizon as though she sought strength from the mountains far beyond the desert. Just as the hangman reached for the rope, the sound of hooves cut through the noise. A lone rider appeared at the edge of town, a broad-shouldered rancher on a dust-stained horse, his shadow long against the blazing sun. He rode slow, deliberate, the kind of man who carried silence heavier than a gun. And as he dismounted, all eyes turned. He looked at Ayanna, then at the noose, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, a promise, a storm about to break. With one gloved hand resting on his saddle, he finally spoke, his voice steady enough to quiet the mob. "You hang her, and you'll answer to me." The square fell silent, the desert wind carrying his words like thunder across the gallows. The crowd did not know whether to laugh or recoil, for the lone rancher's words struck like a spark in dry brush. Men in sweat-stained hats glanced at each other, unsure if they had heard right, while women clutched their shawls tighter, sensing the air thicken with coming conflict. The sheriff shifted his weight, his jaw tightening, his hand hovering near the butt of his revolver, for he knew the man who now stood in the dust. Caleb Turner, a rancher whose name carried weight across the plains, a man who had fought Comanche raids and bandits alike, a man who did not bluff. Caleb's eyes stayed locked on Ayanna, and she, for the first time since dawn, felt a flicker of warmth, not because she believed he could save her, but because someone had finally seen her as more than a shadow to be despised. "This is town business," barked a heavy-set man from the front, his face red with fury. "She's guilty. We all know it." Caleb's gaze turned to him, calm but cold. "All you know is fear, and fear makes liars out of men." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, for no one was accustomed to hearing their prejudice named so plainly. The sheriff raised a hand, trying to regain order, his voice gruff. "Caleb, don't make this harder. Step aside. Justice is justice." Caleb took a step forward, his boots grinding the dust, his shadow stretching until it touched the gallows steps. "Justice," he said quietly, though his voice carried to the farthest ear. "Stringing up a woman because she's Apache isn't justice. It's cowardice dressed in law." The words cut sharp, and though the mob roared back with anger, the seed of doubt had been planted. Ayanna's chest rose and fell, and she turned her eyes on Caleb with the strength of one who had endured storms before. The sheriff's hand brushed his gun again, but he hesitated, because deep down, even he could not bury the truth. Caleb spoke. Silence fell in waves, broken only by the restless stamping of Caleb's horse behind him. The moment felt like a standoff at high noon, not between gunmen, but between an entire town's hatred and the solitary will of one man unwilling to bow. The silence that followed Caleb's words stretched until it seemed even the wind refused to move, the noose above Ayanna swaying lazily as if mocking the stillness. The sheriff's eyes narrowed, his pride warring with the tug of doubt, but before he could speak, another voice cut through the crowd, a wiry ranch hand, face twisted with fear and anger, pointing a shaking finger at Ayanna. "She brought death to my cousin's ranch, burned his barn to the ground." The mob erupted in agreement. though their accusations blended into one another, a chorus built more on hatred than evidence. Caleb did not flinch. He walked slowly, deliberately, toward the gallows, every step stirring dust until his boots rested against the wooden steps leading up to the platform. His voice rose again, calm but edged like a blade. I rode past that ranch myself. Fire took it, yes, but fire leaves a trail. That trail led to spilled lantern oil, not the hand of an Apache woman. You blame her because it's easy, because it spares you from seeing the truth that the man you call neighbor set the blaze himself. Gasps cut through the crowd, suspicion turning like a knife in their bellies as they exchanged uncertain looks. The accused ranch hand sputtered, his face crimson, but Caleb's stare pinned him in place. Ayanna's eyes widened, not from fear but from awe, for this stranger not only defied the mob but carried knowledge they had chosen to ignore. The sheriff's voice shook slightly as he barked, "Enough, Turner. This isn't your fight." Caleb turned slowly, his coat brushing the dust, and fixed the lawman with a stare that carried the weight of iron. When a town gathers to kill an innocent woman because of the color of her skin, it becomes every decent man's fight. The words rang heavy, more powerful than a gunshot, and the crowd faltered, its roar dwindling to uneasy murmurs. For the first time since dawn, the gallows no longer seemed inevitable but questioned, fragile. Children climbed down from barrels. Men shifted uncomfortably. Women lowered their eyes. Yet beneath that shifting doubt, danger brewed. For mobs rarely surrender hatred without blood. The sheriff saw it too, his hand once more brushing the holster at his side, torn between keeping peace and keeping power. Ayanna stood taller now, though her wrists remained bound, her voice quiet but steady as she finally spoke. "You fear me because you do not know me. You hate me because it is easier than admitting your own wrongs." Her words hung in the air, raw and unpolished, but they struck true, and even Caleb turned slightly, as if surprised by the steel in her tone. The town had not yet broken, but a crack had formed, and through that crack, light began to shine. The crack in the mob's certainty widened with each heartbeat. Yet hatred is a stubborn fire, and in Dry Creek that fire still burned. A grizzled rancher near the front spat in the dust and growled, "Words don't change blood. My boy lies in the ground because of her kind." Others muttered in agreement, clinging to rage as if it were the only rope keeping them from drowning in fear. The sheriff, caught between the storm of voices and the steady stare of Caleb, finally stepped forward onto the gallows platform, his boots heavy on the planks. "Turner, you don't speak for this town," he said, his voice hard though his eyes betrayed unease. "The people have spoken, and the law must answer." Caleb took one step up onto the platform, closing the space between them until the tension coiled like a rattlesnake ready to strike. "The law isn't the will of a mob," he answered, his voice low, dangerous. "It's meant to protect the innocent." The crowd swelled, their anger pushing against their own uncertainty, and for a moment it seemed fists would fly, guns would clear leather, and the square would be baptized in blood. Ayanna stood silent, watching the two men, her breath steady as though she knew her fate hung on which one of them would falter first. The sheriff's hand hovered at his side, the air around him charged with the weight of decision, until a sudden shout split the square. "Hang her now. Show him we ain't afraid." The voice belonged to the red-faced ranch hand Caleb had accused, his desperation bleeding into the air. He lunged toward the gallows, reaching for the lever with trembling fingers. Instinct moved faster than thought. Caleb's hand shot out, catching the man by the collar and yanking him back so hard he sprawled in the dirt, choking on dust. The crowd erupted into chaos, some shouting in fury, others gasping in shock. While the sheriff barked orders no one obeyed. Caleb did not flinch. He stood tall on the platform, his hand resting near the revolver at his hip but not drawing it, his presence alone daring anyone to take another step. "You want blood?" he thundered, his voice cutting through the uproar. "Then spill mine first, because I won't let you kill her." The words struck like hammer blows, freezing the mob in place. Eyes darted, whispers hissed, but no one moved forward. Even the sheriff's shoulders sagged under the weight of the moment, his authority slipping like sand through his fingers. Ayanna's gaze never left Caleb, her lips parting as if to speak, but the rancher's silence said more than any words he had made her fight his own. And in that instant, the course of Dry Creek's justice shifted forever.